Alright everybody, and welcome back. In this week's video, we're going to be building this sign. Not just one, but two. And they light up. Come on, let's go. Alright, and like in a number of our sign videos, we're going to start out at the plasma cutter. In this case, we bought some 10-foot sheets and cut a number of different projects out of them. Here we have the off-cut that's sometimes just easier to move down the table and work on a smaller piece than leaving all that scrap on. We start out taking off all the interior pieces of a sheet so that we're not dealing with the possibility of a tip-up, which is when a piece lifts up and the plasma torch catches it as it moves across the table. Somehow this is the only shot I got of Tommy grinding these letters. I was cutting them, he was grinding them, then we jumped right into fabrication. And here they all are done. You can see we've got another sign going there at the same time. Now because the sign is going on a curved arch made of brick, we need to make a curved backplate for the letters to attach to. We could mount them individually to the brick, but because we don't have a way to collect the wires supplying power to the light, we'd be running 7 individual wires through the arch and it would look terrible on the back. So instead we mounted them to a solid piece here, which will contain all that electrical. I'm using the HTP ProPulse 200 here, and I love this machine. You can dial in the settings to exactly what you want. There I had it cranked up for something heavier, so we're going to turn it down to right about where we want for 14 gauge. I like to run a little bit hot and do fast tacks. We start out with those 14 gauge faces, and I'm tacking on some 22 gauge strapping here. It's about 1.25 inches thick, and we choose that size because, as you can see, it's something that I can bend by hand to match all the curves or any of the other features we have to hit, and I can cut it with a pair of tin snips as opposed to having to use a grinder or a saw. This is a pretty labor-intensive process. Each piece has to be done by hand. There's no jigs involved. There's not really any special tools other than the welder. And we just go for it. When we come to a corner here, I'm trying to hide those. So if it's on the inside of a letter, we'll put the joints at the bottom wherever possible. And if it's on the outside of a letter, we'll put them at the top, so that as you're standing slightly below the sign looking up at it, you don't see those welded connections. They will get ground, but it's just better to have them, looking right from the start. So as we continue working our way through this letter, you can see it's probably 20 to 30 minutes per letter on the channeling process here. This strapping's kind of the best of both worlds. We get something that's flexible and can be worked by hand, but is sturdy and isn't gonna, just bend from something leaning on it. These can actually take a pretty decent sized hail ball before they'll start to deform. And even if they do, get a dent in them or anything like that, you can just push them back into place. Now here, you'll see that strapping came just a little bit outside the perimeter of the letter, and the way to fix that is we just weld that entire joint closed, and then when we grind it, we'll make it go away. And we just finish it up with that last little joint there. There's a couple ways to weld this real thin strapping. My preferred method is just kind of tack, 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 tack. And it's done! You see me going to great pains here to make sure that I flip the letters over, because I'm working on the back of the letters. And that's because, as you see with this W right here, I forgot to flip it over. And after doing all that work, getting all that strapping right, this one had to just go into the put it on the display wall pile because it wasn't going to work. One of the best things that you can do when you're approaching a big project like this is save the easiest pieces for last. It's tempted to just get them out of the way, but man, is it nice to get right towards where you can see the light and you can just knock out the easier projects. These L's and the I took 5 or 10 minutes each. Something like the W was more like a 30-minute project. It's a lot more bends and a lot more pieces, a lot more seams. When we get to a sharp corner, the easiest thing to do to get that real sharp is just use a light hammer and tap it into place. Hit it on one side, then on the other, back and forth a couple times, and it'll come out just right. This is where having a helper who, knows how you work and you know how they work comes in great. I'm welding and Tommy's in the background grinding these off. If he finds a blemish or anything, he brings it to me and I clean it up. As you can see, it's a lot of handwork. You gotta feel all those joints and make sure there's not a piece that needs grinding, there's not a missed weld, but the end result is great in my opinion. We'll move right on to mounting these. Tommy's cutting some cutoffs that match the height of the magnets that I have, and I'm using some spare space in this sheet to cut out a stencil. It's not a perfect stencil because it doesn't need to be, but it does show me where to line up all the letters. So after I take those standoffs Tommy cut and the magnets, I can line everything up. This is where the stencil really shines. It does cost a little bit more money to use up that much metal to make a stencil, but the end result speaks for itself, especially on a project like this where you get to use that stencil multiple times. Now we sit there with the standoffs and just put them in place. There's no exact science to this. They're all positioned by hand, but you want them to evenly support the letters. All the letters get 2 except for the L and the I, just because they're so small. And what we're doing here is just putting a couple tacks in, not fully welding them out, so that once we stand it up and look at it, if there's any mistakes, we can adjust those into place, tweak them a little bit before we weld everything out. But fortunately, in both cases, thanks to the stencil, these just lined up perfectly as soon as I stood them up. Now I sit there and weld them out. And as I do so, Tommy's over there grinding, taking off in the spatter, doing any last minute cleanup. He's kind of my quality control, and I'm his when he's working on something and I'm the second pair of hands. Now, when you've got all these complicated shapes and angles and different attack vectors for your paint, it's really the best thing you can do is just hang the piece in midair so you can move all around it. You want it right about chest height. And Tommy and I do the dance, running around, put primer on. This is the Rust-Oleum 15-minute primer, and I love this stuff. It goes on great, leaves a nice finish, and it's sandable. So we go back in here after the first coat and sand them. And we finish off with some hand sanding just to detect any blemishes, but there weren't any. So a final coat of primer, and then we come back in with some hammered textured paint. It's just whatever color is laying around because we're gonna go over it. The texture just helps to kind of bounce the light around a little bit more and gives the surfaces a nicer finish. And it's just coat after coat of black paint. So once that's done, we move over to light blocking. This is a black acrylic caulk. We use this because A, it sets up real quick, and B, that black just blocks any light. Because the outsides were not fully welded down, there's a chance that light will leak out, and this caulking stops that. And then we come back behind with LED strips. These are just standard cooled white LEDs. They're not a waterproof variety or anything like that, because the waterproof ones are not flexible enough to make corners like you can see at the bottom of the L there. Then we solder our wires off using a 16 gauge 2-strand wire with a outer shield of insulation, and the wire has a pull string inside of it, just like a little piece of fiber. So if the wire ever snags on something, the copper won't stretch. That pull string will take that load. Now the advantage to soldering everything together like we're doing here is that we know those joints are solid. If you use connectors, there's always a chance something will get unplugged. That's what I used to do, and I have been in so many customers' attics a year later because something happened, it came unplugged. Now here we're using an auto stripper. This is the blue tool, and it just makes getting the insulation off wires super easy. It's a great investment for like $20, $30. Everybody that does any wiring should definitely have one. Now, as I said with soldering, it's a solid connection. So we twist the wires together and just wet the joint. No complaints. And after that's cooled down, we're gonna put some heat shrink on, shrink that up and give it one final test. So the next step is we got to dress those wires up. We're going to be mounting through this curved arch piece with some screws. So we need those wires out of the way and we need to know where they are. Now we go back with silicone. This is not the place to try and save money on a project. There's about 50 bucks worth of silicone in this sign, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Put the silicone over the LED strips and then kind of this jiggling, pressing down motion, spread it out and completely cover the strip. I have had a lot of people ask questions about this, and I have signs that have been up for 5 years and I've never had a single one fail. I've never had a single piece that was silicone down fail. Had a solder joint fail, but I've never had silicone fail me. And we do the same thing with all the joints up in the arch to make sure they're totally waterproof too. We just move right on over to installation. First thing to do is put the sign up and mark our first hole. We'll drill it out and put one screw in and make any micro adjustments we need to do.
Go up on the left there. Right there.
Once we've found the right position, we mark a couple more holes, and we're going to mark a hole to run a wire through this brick arch. That is an 18-inch bit going through a 30-inch column, and it is solid. So we drill all the way in from one side and then line up level on the other side and hope to hit the hole, and we did. First try both times. So with that all taken care of, we're gonna drill out the rest of the holes we marked earlier and put the sign back on the wall. Fish the wire through first, of course, and then just mount it up. We're using Tapcons here, which are concrete screws, and more than enough to hold this down. We've got 4 on each one. So we move over to putting the conduit together, and one trick here is after you dry fit your conduit, draw a line on each joint all the way to the edge, so that as we pull it apart and glue it all back together, you just connect those lines again, or align them, and everything goes back together. First try, no complaints, no trouble. We glue them up and then we're going to paint them because the customer wanted the conduit to be black. So just do that with some fast drying paint and mount it all up. There's not too much to it at this point. We did not actually terminate the wires. The customer has an electrician who's going to take care of that. So we tested it and moved on.
All right, everyone, thanks for tuning in for that video. If you want to see some more content like this, I invite you to subscribe, hit that like button, and share this with some of your friends, of course. If you want to see any of the products we use, those are going to be in the description. I'm going to go ahead and let the video roll out with a 2-minute time lapse of the building and channeling of all the letters. Thanks, see you next time. All right, everybody, thanks for tuning in for that video. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Of course, there's a helicopter.